Welcome to part 2 of our series this season on the fentanyl crisis in America. If you missed our first fentanyl episode with Deputy Leggett, please be sure to go back and listen to episode 57. Today, we are thankful to welcome Special Agent in Charge Bill Bodner to the Balanced Voice for a discussion on what the DEA is experiencing nationwide regarding fentanyl.
The drug cartels have now started marketing drugs to the experimental drug user and the recreational drug user. And that's what's devastating us. They've taken an extremely powerful drug. They've made it available everywhere through social media, like you said, and the smartphone. And with cash apps and delivery, no matter where you live now, the reality is you live in an open air drug market.
Special Agent in Charge Bill Bodner is a 30-year veteran of the Drug Enforcement Administration and oversees the daily operations of 14 offices located around the world. Mr. Bodner has leveraged his extensive career in Los Angeles to develop and improve upon partnerships with state, local, and other federal agencies. His vision is to conduct very impactful investigations on the most significant drug trafficking organizations posing a threat to our region while keeping in mind the goal of improving the quality of life for those in our community. If you are viewing the visual version of our podcast today, we apologize for the camera angles as some of our files got corrupted. As always, we are committed to bringing impactful conversations to you, and we hope this won't be too distracting. Without further ado, here is your host, Rania and Jennifer, who will be joined later in the episode by co-host Jennifer Homan.
Welcome to the Balanced Voice podcast. We're continuing our discussion on fentanyl poisoning, and really the fentanyl crisis we're facing in this country. We're thrilled to be joined by Special Agent in Charge Bill Bodner, a 30-year veteran of the Drug Enforcement Administration, joining us from Los Angeles. Agent Bodner, how are you? Good morning.
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation to come on.
Thank you for being with us. I'll tell you, we cover so many topics at Crime Stoppers. I'm a mom of 3. We do a lot of issues around this protection of children, from human trafficking to teen dating violence to cyberbullying. For some reason, this topic scares me more than others. And I think people are still trying to understand what fentanyl poisoning means, how it's going to impact or potentially impact our children. It's been labeled by the media as like another child dies of a drug overdose, and it's confusing. Can you kind of explain what's going on and why you and your partners at the DEA are launching campaigns and really raising awareness on this topic?
I think raising awareness, what you just said, is the most important thing right now. What we're seeing in most of the cases, especially with teenagers, is an element of deception, which is kind of new to drug-caused deaths, right? Years ago, a drug-caused death was unfortunately someone who suffered from substance use disorder, and they went through periods of sobriety and then back to using drugs. And somewhere in those transitions, generally that's where an overdose would occur, and they would unfortunately die. The situation now is so much different because we have fentanyl, an extremely powerful drug, a very accessible drug. And the issue is that it's being marketed deceptively by the drug cartels, by the Sinaloa cartel, by the Jalisco New Generation cartel. They've taken a drug 50 times more powerful than heroin, and they've made it look like a prescription drug that we're all familiar with in the United States and comfortable with. For example, Xanax is one that I see a lot of children, a lot of teenagers seeking out and getting fentanyl. Percocet, oxycodone. That's really where that element of poisoning becomes in, because these aren't necessarily people that are seeking out fentanyl. They're saying, man, I want to get some fentanyl and get high. They're seeking out something else and they're being deceived. And that's where the element of poisoning comes in.
So it's interesting. You think of your child who's not a drug user, who's on social media. So we can kind of paint the picture of how this happens. Your child's just on social media. They'll see an ad across, it could be Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, it can be any social media platform, for pills. You're talking about Xanax, Percocet, Adderall, and a young a 17-year-old, an 11-year-old, a 14-year-old girl or boy might want to try this because it's like, hey, I've been lifting weights at the gym and my shoulder hurts. I want a Percocet. Or I've heard Adderall helps you concentrate or lose weight. And it's 15 cents or $1. It can be delivered to your home. I'll pay via Cash App. What's the worst that can happen? But what they're finding is they're buying these pills that are laced with just a minuscule amount of fentanyl, and they're dying instantly. So that's one scenario. On the other side, and I guess we'll actually talk about the other side in a minute. Let's go back to that. Why are drug dealers, why are the cartel or whoever has access to this fentanyl, why are they doing this if the chances of killing the user so high?
Right. So, I mean, that's a great question. That's a question I get a lot. Think of it like who their market is. Now, if you're selling heroin, you have a very small market. There's not the way I would explain it to people is there's not a lot of people, experimental drug users, right? Let's classify people as experimental drug users, then maybe recreational drug users, people that have some experience with using drugs, trying different drugs. And now they say, hey, I'm going to go party this weekend. I'm going to go to a concert and I'm going to party. And then on the other end, or the extreme end is substance use disorder, right? People that have an addiction to drugs. The drug cartels have now started marketing drugs to the experimental drug user and the recreational drug user. And that's what's devastating us. Think of it like if I put a bag of heroin on a table with a syringe and a spoon and a lighter, and next to it, I put one of these brightly colored pills. And if I said to a teenager, which of those two looks more threatening to you? They would say the pill, right? They would say the pill. The reality is that pill is 50 times more deadly than the heroin. So that, in essence, is what the problem is. They've taken an extremely powerful drug. They've made it available everywhere through social media, like you said, and the smartphone. Since COVID, a lot of the retail drug sale business went online, went on social media, and it's kind of stayed there. And with cash apps and delivery, no matter where you live now, the reality is you live in an open air drug market. And I'll tell people this and they'll be like, no, not my neighborhood. Like that doesn't happen in my neighborhood, or that doesn't happen at my kid's school. And my response is no, now it does because of technology. There is no quote neighborhood anymore, right? If it's available one place, it's available everywhere. And I think that's the big change and the big issue that's causing a lot of the poisonings and deaths is availability of the drug and the way this drug has been made to look very non-threatening to appeal, like they did that for a specific reason, to appeal to these new drug users. Hey, here's the reality. Like teenagers have always experimented with drugs. That's not new. It's just now the drugs they're experimenting with are extremely, extremely dangerous. And that's kind of the crux of the problem that I see.
So you talk about this open air drug market. You paint the analogy of, a colorful pill that looks non-threatening versus, heroin and the needle and the spoon. All, obviously the pill looks like, yeah, I'll try the pill. I'm not going to touch the needle or the heroin. When in reality, that pill can be so dangerous. And I guess the dealer is hoping to get you hooked and get you hooked for life. If you end up dying, you end up dying. But I go back to this open air drug market, the helping families understand, Dr. Laura Berman and Sam Chapman, and the loss of Sam Chapman was so compelling because it's sort of like the all-American family, white picket fence, good kids. They're home during lockdown, during COVID, and this still infiltrated their home because the pill was able to be sent to the home, or Sammy could just walk out the front door and meet the dealer. I mean, that stuff is, you want the average family to understand how grave the reality is. But how do we respond to it? I mean, are social media companies doing anything? You all are doing so much at the DEA, but what are your challenges? How can the community be helping you?
I think the first thing is, and we alluded to it earlier a little bit, is awareness. Because what my fear was, at least, 6 months, a year ago, and even still now, my fear is that these teenagers don't know what's in the pill that they're buying and taking. My thing is we need to empower these teenagers to make better decisions. We can't ask them to make a decision about drug use when they don't have the information about what that drug is. So step number one is empower teenagers with information so they can make a more intelligent decision. That's what we want them to do. That kind of has to take place in three different areas, I think. The first one is in the home. And the mistake that I used to make is I used to kind of naively, and probably because, just my occupation, right? I would tell parents, hey, just talk to your kids about drugs and educate them about the risks. The problem is the parents don't know. Like, this is a new trend. This has only been around for a couple of years, and it's really gotten drastically worse in the past, maybe even just 6 or 12 months. So parents need to educate themselves first. That's step one. Then they need to have very real conversations with their kids. Part two is the schools. We need professional educators, people who know how to connect with children and deliver information to children. We need them to also build awareness and have some type of curriculum about the drug threats, especially fentanyl. Where is it in the illicit drug supply chain? What are the dangers of it? What does it do to your body? Why does it kill you? That type of thing. And then finally, the thing that I feel is almost most important is we have to look at where kids get their information. Where do teenagers get their information? We need social media influencers to get on board with this message. And the message is about empowerment. It's about giving children information so that they can make better decisions, teenagers. That's where teenagers are going to get their information, from social media influencers. I mean, that's who they're kind of connecting with, so to speak. They're not watching me on the evening news do a press conference about a big fentanyl seizure or talking about where fentanyl is in the community, So I think if we can cover, with help from the community, because, hey, I don't know that DEA necessarily has the best connection with youth to go to children, to go to teenagers and say, this is what you need to know. We need people who have that connection, parents, educators, social media influencers, to really step up right now and help us deliver this message and see if that can't turn the tide. Right now, like I said, I think there's a lot of deception going on, a lot of people taking these pills that don't know what they are. If we find out that in fact these teenagers do know what they're taking, then the messaging has to shift. If they're making the decision, hey, I know this is fentanyl, I'm going to take it, then the messaging has to shift. But right now, we really have to just be clear on building awareness.
We are such proponents of building awareness. It's why we have the podcast. It's so much of what we do at Crime Stoppers. We're in the schools. We're constantly creating messaging to reach kids. But, people will say to us, yeah, but are you kind of, being paranoid? This isn't a really big issue. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the families that will say, yeah, but we live in a good neighborhood. I mean, I think it is important that everybody stop and consider how dangerous this is, and the likelihood of it reaching your home. It's not absolutely crazy for us to be talking about it. Some numbers: DPS seized 336.3 million lethal doses of fentanyl during the border mission via Operation Lone Star. Governor Abbott recently said there was an 800% increase of fentanyl reported crossing just the Texas border. I know you're in California. I think the influx of fentanyl is something that's quite significant and quite scary. We also know that the manipulation of the pills, one, to make them look like they're real prescription drugs, or two, to make them look like candy, is what's really, really frightening to me. You guys are launching a one pill can kill campaign, and talking about what the emojis might look like, what the pills can do to you. And I think that's very important. And we want everybody to go to DEA.gov and look at the information and talk about it. But I think your discussion on influencers is so interesting. I always share this story. We've talked about animal cruelty for a really long time. And one day, we'd been talking about adopt, don't shop. And one day my daughter said to me, we need a puppy, but we have to adopt, not shop. And I said, yes, that's right. Is that because you've heard us talking about it? She goes, no, Kylie Jenner just posted adopt, don't shop. Right. And I was like, well, there you go. So we're working with you hand in hand, but we still have an issue with these social media companies that are not safeguarding the platforms. These pill pushers and drug dealers can still sell freely on the platforms. How do we stop that?
Yeah, we need them to do more. That's the bottom line. We need them to do more. We need to hold them accountable. it's challenging, right? Because the way I explain it to people is, we have very different missions. Like the DEA mission is to keep the community safe and healthy. What is the mission of a social media platform?
Mm.
It's to maximize shareholder return. That is the mission of a publicly traded company. They have a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder return. When they're doing these, let's call them back office things, security functions within their platform, those don't necessarily translate to bottom line profits, right? It's a cost center. It's costing them money, and it's really not generating revenue for them to do to do additional security stuff. So I think for the social media companies, at some point, it becomes an issue of reputational risk. Um, how much is the trafficking of drugs on their website? How much is people dying after consuming drugs that were purchased on their website or on their platform? How much does that damage the reputation of a company before we can get them to invest more and do more? And I guess that's kind of where we're at now, is just pushing them to do more. Hey, there are points of intersection between DEA, keep everyone safe and healthy, and social media platform, maximize shareholder return. There are points of intersection there where we will collaborate with them. Maybe they'll give us a lead, or we'll talk to them about a particular account online. We're always serving legal process, subpoenas, court orders on them to get information about these people. That's where we do collaborate, but the push is for them to do more unilateral stuff, police their own platform more. And we're hoping to see that as we move forward with this, because, we're not going back to street corner drug sales. Like, this is a much better model for the drug traffickers, and it's gonna continue to proliferate. It's gonna continue to get worse.
Thank you to our Season 5 sponsor, FlipLock, for making this episode possible. FlipLock was created as a nationwide, straightforward solution to protect your people, whether it be in universities, dorms, daycares, hospitals, or even government buildings. We're proud to have such a strong and like-minded sponsor this season. Check out FlipLock at fliplock.com. That's FLIPLOK.com.
Is there a case, now that you've been working on this and focusing your time on this, is there a case that still sort of tugs at your heart? A user that was obviously not an active user, but somebody young, or just, we want to hear stories, if you have any that come to mind, that you can share to make it real for families.
I know, it's all of them. And I mean, the thread that I see, the common thread between a lot of them, and I almost heard you kind of allude to it earlier, is a parent who will say, I thought my home was safe.
Yeah.
And it's so devastating to hear that, because, you don't know, like that smartphone and these social media apps. And I'm not just speaking like specific to drugs, although that's what we're talking with now, but trafficking, human trafficking, and, sexual predators and everything. That is an avenue. The phone, or the smartphone, or social media apps are an avenue to kind of bring that stuff into your home. And that's the thing that I think parents need to become aware of, is you have to monitor your kids' social media. Just like in let's say the old days, to date us, if you want to know what your kid was doing, what did you do? You looked out the window.
Yeah.
You looked out the window and you met their friends when they came to the door. I mean, it's not like that anymore. So parents have to really be involved with who their children are friending on social media, why they're friending them, track the messages, the interaction with them, because that is the new, let's call it the new playground. That's like the new playground where kids are socializing. And that's where a lot of these connections are made.
We always talk about understanding the risks and having the conversations. Of course, you mentioned awareness. Dr. Laura Berman and Sam Chapman have launched a campaign, #LetParentsProtect, and they're getting thousands and thousands of signatures to hopefully get parents engaged and joining this initiative to change legislation to allow for third-party monitoring. And I think that's very, very important. You need to be able to, you can't be all things for your children at all time. You can't be watching every account at all time, but we need to be having the conversation. We need to have the tools to allow parents to have assistance when they're monitoring those platforms. What's your experience? Do you think the likelihood of that passing? I mean, I know it's going to be an uphill battle. Federal legislation is going to be an uphill battle, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it's hard to say because, it's the whole thing I think, as a society we've been dealing with lately, which is kind of the law enforcement mission and protecting people versus freedoms. And as more things go virtual, as more things go online, it really gets blurry, that in between area of where we draw the line on that. So I don't know. I think it's very important. Third party monitoring is huge. And it's something that I feel like we really should have. It's like a basic step that parents need to be empowered to take to protect their kids.
Well, this season of the podcast, we have a special co-host, Jennifer Homan, who's joining us. And Jen, we want to bring you in on this conversation. You've done a lot of work on protecting kids online and protecting kids in general when it comes to human trafficking. We're now dealing with another crisis, which is what we're calling it, the fentanyl crisis, and the influx of these drugs and the impact they're having on children. We want to bring you in on this conversation. What are your thoughts? I mean, we just talked to one of our deputies here in Houston that actually was impacted by the fentanyl dust during sort of a drug bust and sweeping this room. We're now talking about the impact it's having on children. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are this. It's so close to home for me. I just dealt with a former colleague that we used to work together. And my thought around this space is the apps. It's these apps that are online, that the Discord, the Snapchat. Literally, I just dealt with a case where a little boy was, exploited online by being followed by probably at least 50 predators. And so when is it going to be corporate social responsibility for Silicon Valley and these applications to come to the table and stop and start monitoring what's going on online? And so that to me is a place where we continuously need more legislation and support, and holding them civilly and criminally responsible for the facilitation of children being exploited online, whether it's drugs or whether it's sex.
As we navigate this and raise awareness, and Jen, to your point, and we've been talking about the impact of social media and the easy access between children now and dealers locally and across the country. There are necessary steps for all of us right now. One, we talked about awareness. We have to have the conversation. Any parent that says, well, I don't want to scare my child, or this really isn't something that we need to worry about. I have good kids. They have great friends. I'm just not worried about it. We need to break that. We need to break those myths. Other things, that I think are very shocking for families is we want to talk about having Narcan nasal spray in everyone's home. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that too is something that people need to run and be getting, or do you think that we're, exaggerating the issue, Agent Bodner?
Oh no, I think it's I think it's necessary now. I look at it like a life jacket. Even if you can swim, there's times when you want to have a life jacket nearby if you're out on a boat or something like that. And it's similar with Narcan. I think it should be carried. I know it's available in schools now here in LA now. After some recent incidents, they have it in all the schools in LA Unified School District. There's really no reason not to have it. And by the way, that's almost a protocol now for EMT people when they encounter someone who's down. It's like, is the person conscious, or should? And the first thing is Narcan administration. It's almost like the first thing that's done when you encounter someone who's down, who's having difficulty. So yeah, I feel like it should be everywhere now.
I support that. I totally. Let me tell you the tools that I think. Number one, Rania, your book on educating parents on how to handle and create a strategy with their children about online safety and creating for themselves, developing a brand so that children are involved in, hey, this is who I'm going to be online, and these are the ramifications of building a brand online, and so that they understand and are a part of it. I think that's tool number one. Tool number two is I keep drug tests in my house. So you can go to Walgreens, you can go to CVS, wherever, and you basically purchase tests. And I sporadically on my teenagers would pop drug tests just to see, are they smoking weed? Have they done some cocaine? I think that's a tool. The third one is monitoring tools on their online social, just to monitor what's going on online. And then now Narcan. So there are just some really good, as well as, cameras on your house. We've seen kids where they were going out to either meet dealers or people that were sexually exploiting them, where the parents didn't have cameras and could be alerted that some activity is happening in the middle of the night where their child is leaving their home and they're asleep.
Yeah.
And so those are some tools that I think every home needs, and they're not that expensive. They're very affordable, and there are programs out there that can help you even purchase them if it's not affordable for you.
And it's hard to get there. I mean, it is hard to get there, but what we're urging parents to do is take it a piece at a time. We've listed some tools, take whichever ones you can start with, but don't ignore this topic, because too many young children are losing their lives when they're not drug users. They had no intention of engaging in drug activity. They thought they were taking a Xanax or a Percocet or an Adderall, and yet they end up losing their lives. But I'll tell you, Jen, I can hear parents say, like, I can't just drug test my children. That's sort of not our family culture. My kids have never done anything. I can't imagine doing that. We'll have cameras, but we found out the dealer was like in class, and it was on a soccer team. So the camera, so it's hard to wrap your head around this topic. It really is. But
Rania, the last thing you want, you have two choices, right? There's this really great parenting methodology that I buy into. It's called Love and Logic. And you have to give your child choices. And we need to give parents what their choices are. Choice number one is to do none of this. You can incrementally introduce these tools into your life and in a slower way so that it's not so startling for your child. You can do nothing, or you can, and the choice is that someday you may have to make a call to Agent Bodner or myself to help you go find your child. And the second choice is start introducing some of these tools we're telling you about, and then at least decrease your probability of having Agent Bodner or myself have to get involved and get private investigators to help go find your child. You got two choices.
Agent Bodner and Jen, I agree with that. I completely agree with you on that. And I want to ask you a few myth questions, if you can sort of break the myths for us or tell us what's real or fake. We had a lot of discussion on fentanyl and if it's impactful, if it ends up being something you simply touch or you end up sniffing. Like the deputy that was just on with us described sweeping a room after a major drug bust. They had been, I guess, weighing fentanyl pills. She put the weight down. It touched her skin. It wafted up to her nose, and she started to feel lightheaded. They ended up calling 911, giving her Narcan nasal spray. But the question became, but can fentanyl really impact you that way? What is your answer to that?
I mean, for us, so the answer is yes. If it becomes airborne, if you're in a situation where there's a lot of residue or powder that becomes airborne, it's a real threat. And for example, if we were going to go into a house where we expected there to be a large amount of fentanyl, our people would wear what's almost equivalent to a hazmat suit. And that's an extreme. I get it, but that's what we do to keep ourselves safe. We would never field test these drugs out in the field anymore. We would take them back to the office, and we have a fume hood, like a vent hood, like you would see in a laboratory, and you reach into it and you're, kind of doing it in a very controlled environment. Now, that being said, these drugs are transported across the border, as you all know, and they come to our metropolitan areas, Houston, LA, in cars, and the drivers of those cars don't die, right? So there are dangers, but the danger is really when it's something that becomes kind of abruptly airborne. And the example you gave, I can see that happening. And we've seen that in houses where police go in and someone tries to like clean off a table or move drugs real quick, and it gets in the air and it's breathed. That's a very, very real danger. Touching it, not as dangerous. Like I don't personally have that fear if I were to touch pills or touch it. And the other thing it depends on is how pure the powder is, right? I mean, the powder that we see, on the West Coast, the fentanyl powder is maybe 7 or 8% pure. If it were 100% pure, it would be a whole different story. And those people that are driving it would have health issues, right? So there's so many variables involved. I mean, we take the threat very serious, but at the same time, not everyone who touches it or comes in contact with it dies. And how do we know that? Because the drug dealers aren't necessarily dying when they're transporting, right?
Okay, another myth of candy, these fentanyl-laced candy pills. Is it going to wind up on third-party marketplace? When you go to Facebook Marketplace to buy Halloween candy or Christmas candy, I mean,
Right.
can it wind up in somebody's candy jar at home? How likely is it that these pills can be transported, as you and I were saying, in a Skittles package and a Nerds?
Right.
Where is this going to ultimately end up? Because honestly, that does scare me. Jen, you and I talked about this the other day. I mean, I find it highly frightening.
Yeah. And so here's what I would say. And I think, hey, there's bad people in our community. And if there's people out there that are going to purposefully try to harm children, this year, they were also here last year. I don't see the significant threat this year. And of course, I'm the person that never says never, because we don't know. But I don't see the significant threat of a child going trick-or-treating and being given something purposefully by someone with fentanyl in it. But here is the very real threat I see. And I kind of wish that people would recognize this. And this is real fact. Just last week, we seized 12,000 fentanyl pills here, and it was packaged in candy boxes and bags, Skittles bags and Sweet Tarts boxes, right? So when you're using that as a concealment method and a smuggling method, here's what happens. It goes, so let's say that night that we seized those drugs, had we not seized them, they would have gone out into the community and they would still be in those candy bags and candy boxes. They would go into homes. Maybe there's kids in those homes. And a very real fear I have is around Halloween time, a child sees this bag of Skittles in the home, takes it, and takes it to school. That is a real fear. So for all these people out there that are saying, oh, DEA is fear mongering and this isn't going to happen on Halloween, I just described to you how it can happen. And we've had very real cases. There was one in Las Vegas where a child brought a bunch of pills to school, and the soccer kids, the kids on the soccer team, several of them took them and they had some, overdoses. So it is a real thing. Now, like I said, I don't think that you're going to get a candy bar poisoned with fentanyl, but who knows what crazy people we have in our community. If I was going to give advice to parents, I would say check your kids' candy like you do every year, hopefully, and see what they're getting from people in the community and make sure it looks legit and it's unopened, etc. But my fear is what people have in their homes that kids think is candy because of the time of year it is, when it's really drugs packaged in candy boxes.
So, Agent Bodner, I mean, that's such a reality. I have to tell y'all. Now, Rania, I always admit to all the different things I did as a crazy child. But, when I was in fifth grade, this is back in the 80s. When I was in fifth grade, one of my best friends brought his brother's cigarettes and weed to school. I promise I didn't partake in the weed, but I did smoke a cigarette. I mean, and these are things, this is substance that looks like weed and looks like a cigarette. So can you imagine something that looks like candy? And these kids take it from their older brothers or older sisters, whatever. They may be living in a home that's dealing or whatever, a part of the ring, and they take it to school. So that I 100% say that is not a myth. That is absolutely true reality, that accidentally somehow this can get out of school, get to school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And don't tell my mom that I smoked the cigarettes. All I got to say.
I won't tell her. But that is a real fear of mine too. That's a real fear of mine too, especially when, everyone, there's no danger of that. There's no danger of that. Well, never say that. Never say there's no danger of something. Look at it for what it is and think about where children could access it and what could happen.
And just I want to just make sure I understand this. The candy is packaged in like a closed, so it would be somebody could open a Skittles.
You mean the drug is packaged? The drug is packaged in a Skittles.
So here's what would happen is you'd get a Skittles bag. Maybe you would very carefully tear it open, dump out the Skittles, put let's say 50 pills in it, and then actually glue it shut again. So it would be a sealed bag. And then when you're doing your smuggling, you just have bags of Skittles in the car. It doesn't look, maybe you have a plastic bag from the grocery store and it looks like you just bought them. That's very innocent looking. And then when you sell them to people, whether it's on the street or by social media or wherever, it's not like you cut the bag open and dump the pills out in the hand. You give them the bag. This is 50 pills right here or whatever. And that's how it gets out in the community in these concealment methods that could cause issues for us.
And sorry, one of our team members is asking, Agent, how did you all come to find that?
That was at the airport through screening. We have a team of agents working with the local sheriff's department here in LA, and TSA screening bags saw something unusual, called us to the scene, and that's what we discovered.
Very scary. We're encouraging everybody to go to DEA.gov. Follow their One Pill Can Kill campaign. Agent Bodner, 30-year veteran of the Drug Enforcement Administration. You oversee 14 offices, Nevada, Hawaii, Guam, and 7 Southern California counties. We thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We encourage everybody to continue following this conversation, continue following us at the Balanced Voice podcast. Again, we thank you all for your time, and we'll see everybody next week. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Balanced Conversation. You can find real solutions and tangible resources in our show notes at thebalancedvoicepodcast.com. To join the conversation, follow us on Instagram at The Balanced Voice Podcast and on Twitter at @BalancedVoice_. Stay up to date on Rania's work by following her at The Rania Report, and we can't wait to see you next week for another Balanced Conversation.